Good morning.
Morning.
Hope everyone is well. Please feel free to move around if you like to. People outside as well, if you'd like to be able to see or I need to shift around a little. Please feel free to do that. So this morning I'd like to continue speaking about wisdom. Prajna is the word in Sanskrit, and what we've been talking about, or what I've been talking about in these series of teachings over the past few months, is liberation. The way that the perfections was a particular, one of the most ancient ways of organizing the teachings and practices, how those perfections, also known as crossing overs, that they are all about liberation. That's what crossing over means. It means to be liberated from samsara, or liberated from the cycles of suffering which mark our lives. And when it comes to these teachings of prajna, the teachings of prajna or teachings of wisdom have to do with how it is that we conceive the world. How does the world appear to us? What do we do to produce our experience of life? The wisdom teachings are dropping some seeds into that process, the process of the way in which a world appears to us, a life appears to us, moment after moment after moment after moment. And the wisdom teachings are saying there's a way to liberate how we see. Okay? The way in which we see can be liberated. And if we liberate the way that we see through wisdom, through prajna, that liberates the way that we are. It liberates the way that we act. It liberates the way that we carry out this life. That side we refer to as compassion. Karuna is the word in Sanskrit. So the liberation that comes from seeing differently liberates the way that we are. Liberating the way that we are liberates the way that we conceive of the world. So a different kind of cycle emerges. The cycle of suffering, the cycle of dukkha, which is continually circling around this sense of unsettledness or anxiousness, or sometimes we call it suffering. Now we've started a different kind of cycle, a cycle which is liberating, which is allowing us not to just rely on that center of anxiousness for how we function, but something else. And that something else we classically would be called nirvana, settledness, peacefulness, at easement, peace of mind. It's a very elusive thing. And sometimes we read the teachings, or we start practicing, and we think about this liberation as being something very, very long term. And that's true. It's, if you're in it, you got to be in it for the long haul, or else the short term things won't really work. We've got to invest in a realignment. We'll talk a little bit about that today. But if we think that we've got to wait for the fruits of liberation to come until later, we'll miss the very important cues that appear when we are conceiving of the world through prajna, through a liberated mind. When we see with a liberated mind, something's different right away. We experience a freedom right away. It's not something that we're just waiting to happen later on. And as we feel that freedom, as we know something about the unbinding of our anxiousness, of our karma, then we know something about how to take the next step. Right? It's teaching us, the world's teaching us about freedom. A little bit like gravity. It teaches us something about living on this planet. right? But you have to spend some time learning about gravity. When you're little, you're just on your back. You don't know too much about gravity, right? It's there, it's doing a lot of things for you. And then slowly you develop this relationship with gravity. And a freedom emerges because there's gravity. That's the whole reason we can walk, the whole reason we can dance. It's probably the reason we can think, actually. Without gravity, we probably couldn't even do that. There was a funny cartoon yesterday in the paper of the beanbag, guy laying in the beanbag, and they're up in space. And there's these two guys, they're like, oh, gravity is probably why these beanbags are comfortable. It's just like, I don't know, one of those very weird comics. Just remembered it. Anyway, so this is the same thing with our life. The Dharma, which sometimes is translated as the law, what the Buddha woke up to. We're in it all the time. Right? But as we pay attention to our life, we pay attention to the way that we conceive the world and the way that we are in the world, the way we are with others, then we start seeing these places where a freedom emerges, a freedom that's really quite profound. So last week I was saying really to take these teachings of prajna and invest in them, invest yourself through this different way of conceiving. I said to invest your soul, right? To put yourself on the line, right? To really say, I want to see the world differently. You have to change the way that you're seeing it. You have to move to a different place and see it through that way. You can't do that abstractly. You can't say, if I happen to be standing over there, looking this direction, this is what I theoretically would see. You actually have to go over there and then look that direction to be able to see it, right? So encouraging people to take this very, they're not complicated teachings, but they're powerful teachings, and to apply them to the way it is that you see the world. To conceive through wholeness rather than opposition, rather than thinking through a process of the world being awash of objects, right? And that I am a subject in a world of objects, and that I'm always in a kind of oppositional relationship. Sometimes that means oppositional, like I'm trying to fight it, but oppositional just means those things are standing over here and I'm standing over here. The roots of conceiving the world that way in Buddhism is known as ignorance. Sometimes we use the term delusion. Non-luminescence is the way that it's written in Chinese. Right? So to conceive of the world through wholeness. The traditional word here we would say emptiness. We would say to see the world through the eyes of emptiness. To see the world through the eyes of prajna or wisdom is to see with the eyes of emptiness. Emptiness, oftentimes people don't like that word so much. It's related to a lot of things that tickle us in a not great way. We could just say in this case, in a very simple sense, emptiness is empty of independent existence. Right? Emptiness is not a thing. Emptiness is the way that we are arising together. It's another way that we talk about our interdependence. Right? We'll go into that a little bit more today. So the basic formula that I was presenting is a tree is not a tree, therefore it is a tree. We flip up over the way that we normally conceive things. Normally we conceive things, we say, oh, this is a tree. It's not a bush, therefore it's a tree. But in the dynamics of prajna, or in this seed of liberation that prajna plants, it says, no, a tree, what you think of as a tree, what you see as a tree, what the phenomena that arises as a tree, it's not a tree. It's not what you grasp with your mind. There is an image that appears, right? Like you can see, you could touch the tree, you can interact with the tree. But every time your mind clamps down on the tree and says, this is a tree, it's missing something. It's missing all the things that go into the tree being the tree. You're just seeing like an image, in the classical language, it's like a bubble in a stream. What you see as the tree is just like this bubble. Maybe a soap bubble you could think of. Maybe we would change the sutra, we'll call it. It's like a soap bubble in the bath, right? And that's what you're seeing. It doesn't mean that it is unreal in the sense that you're not having an experience. You are having an experience. You can knock right into the tree. Right? Have you ever run into a tree? It hurts. I've done that a few times. I remember one time I was out in the front yard and my brother was chasing me, and I forgot that the tree was right behind me, and he was like, "Ah!" And he was coming for me, and I turned and I ran, like I just ran in this, my parents' house, this big maple tree in the front yard, and I can still feel the bouncing off of the tree. And he felt bad for 2 or 3 seconds, I think, but anyway, the tree's there. That's not what this teaching is about. But the tree is made up of the sun, it's made up of the earth, it's made up of rain, it's made up of my mind that is conceiving of the tree. It's made up of all of these things, right? So if I want to really encounter the tree, then I have to admit that whatever it is that I'm seeing as the tree, right, is not independent. That's just a face of the wholeness of things showing up as a tree. And we can study that through meditation. Right? We study it through sitting and letting go of the oppositional mind. And as the oppositional mind starts to fade away, you start to experience the world in a different way. Things that seemed outside, the garbage truck going by, all of a sudden it's not exactly outside. You can't quite say, where is the garbage truck? I mean, in one sense, of course it's out there. There's somebody driving it, right? But in another sense, you start seeing, the world is made up of all of this deep interconnectedness, an interweb of experience, of which my being able to see, my being able to experience is an emergence of the wholeness in a particular form. We can also study that through the other paramitas. We can study it through generosity, for example. We can call the bluff on there being a me and a you when it comes to all these things that we hoard. It's great. Or a kind word. That's a kind of generosity. We can share our heart, we can share our mind. When we do that, the world starts to appear to us in another way. So in the traditional teaching, we would say that the prajna is the change in the way we conceive of the world. And then the way we are or the way we act in the world are the other paramitas. So generosity, ethics, patience, vigor, meditation. Those are all the ways that prajna activates through a life. Their karuna, their compassion. So up to this point, I think that this is, is very good medicine, and it's a little bit sweet, maybe a little too sweet, right? But you should apply it. Powerful teaching. But there's a way in which a powerful teaching like this gets much more, hard to stay attuned to when it comes to challenging things, when it comes to differences that are a challenge, for example. It's easy to use the emptiness teaching or prajna teachings to sweep away differences. So when we sweep aside differences, especially when those differences are a kind of a challenge, this very subtle thing happens, and it's very destructive. We reify emptiness. We make emptiness into a thing. Okay? We make it into a thing, it becomes a tool to fashion more things. So, case in point, which we're going to talk a little bit about this morning, we have very clear teachings from very early on in Buddhism that we should not regard men and women as having a different capacity in the Dharma. And yet, we have a tradition that has been patriarchal from day one and has regarded women in a lower place. And there have been doctrines, there have been all kinds of ways in which the teachings themselves have been presented to say that you have to be a man to become a Buddha. Oftentimes when this is brought up in the current context, someone will say something like, well, yeah, but there's no difference between men and women. And they will cite some kind of an emptiness teaching. Right? They'll say for there to be a man, there has to be a woman, and for there to be women, there has to be men. They're totally interdependent on each other, and we don't discriminate. Dogen Zenji is often quoted in this way, the founder of our school. Right? He was very clear about the necessity to not sweep this difference under the rug, but to deeply honor women. Right? And so people will quote him, and he has a great fascicle, Raihai Tokuzi is the name in Japanese, where he's saying to the monks, male monks, if you don't know how to bow to a woman, then you are not a practitioner of the Dharma. Very clear. But all of this is used as a kind of subtle way to sweep something under the rug, right? Or to not pay attention to the difference. Or the emptiness teaching can become that. Now, I'm using here gender as an example because I want to go back to these teachings in the Vimalakirti Sutra that I opened up a couple weeks ago, but it's all over the place. The beautiful teachings of emptiness, the way that we change how we conceive of the world, when we can start feeling the wholeness of things, a danger arises that we will try to grab onto the wholeness. And in the process of grabbing onto the wholeness, we deny the particular, that we start to sweep the particular away in favor of the wholeness. Right? But there is no wholeness without the particular, and there is no particular without the wholeness. That's the teaching of emptiness. It's not, the tree is not a tree, therefore it is everything. That's not the teaching. The teaching is the tree is not a tree, therefore it is a tree. See? The tree is not just simply what I experience as being a tree. It actually is the wholeness of things. And because it's the wholeness of things, I must treasure it as a tree. Not as a destruction of the tree, but as the tree. This is very important. And so the Prajnaparamita teachings, which includes the Vimalakirti Sutra that I've been talking from, is a Mahayana sutra that is really steeped in the wisdom teachings. Again and again and again, there is this warning against trying to destroy dharmas, that we don't try to make things, we don't try to destroy things. And we have to be very careful about this if the Prajna teachings are going to actually help us become wise and to enact compassion through our life. So in the Vimalakirti Sutra, in chapter 7, it's really beautiful. Manjushri, who is the bodhisattva of wisdom, is asking Vimalakirti. Vimalakirti is a holy man, a householder who is revered for his deep, penetrating insight. And in the sutra, there are many different beings, bodhisattvas and otherwise, who come to ask Vimalakirti about different topics. And in this case, Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, comes to Vimalakirti and he asks him these interesting questions. He says, how should a bodhisattva regard all living beings? How should I see things? This is the terrain we're in. How should I see things? And Vimalakirti, to give you a taste of how Vimalakirti replies, he says, Manjushri, a bodhisattva should regard all living beings as a wise man regards the reflections of the moon in water, or as magicians regard men created by magic. He should regard them as being like a face in a mirror, like the water of a mirage, like the sound of an echo, like a mass of clouds in the sky, like the previous moment of a ball of foam. And he goes on and on, all of these different images of something that's just completely ungraspable, not real in the kind of tangible way we usually think of things as being real. Right? So think of that. He says, think of all beings as being like the reflection of the moon in water. Yeah? You can see it, but you can't grab it. You can't hold it. You can't make it real in the way that you think of realness as being some kind of permanence, right? Some kind of tangibility. And so then Manjushri asks him, well, then how does he generate the great love for these beings? Because if everything's a reflection in the mirror, doesn't that seem like you could kind of just dismiss it? You say, oh, it's just a reflection in the water. It's no big deal. You know, if the actual moon, was down in the water, maybe you try to get it. If there's a ball like that luminous ball down in the water, wouldn't you try to grab that? So, it's amazing, right? But it's just a reflection. And so you say, oh, there's no way to grasp it. Right? So this question in the mind of wisdom comes up. If I begin seeing things as a reflection, if I begin seeing that the tree isn't the tree, won't I just disregard things? Isn't the teaching say that I should develop a great love for beings? This term love is a lot of translators try to dodge using that term love because it's a complicated word in English. Has a lot of different layers of meaning. It's in the Sanskrit. It's related to the word for friend. So a lot of people are familiar with metta. You may have heard of the Metta Sutra or metta practices. The Maitri is the word in Sanskrit. In Pali, it's metta. So loving kindness, the quality of heart that you have with a friend that you deeply care about. So wisdom says, well, what am I supposed to do? If everything's a mirage, how am I supposed to see the world in that way? Because the Dharma says that I should regard the world as my friend, that I have a great love for. And so then what follows is Vimalakirti's teaching about that. He's saying that we should uncover the love that is not based in grasping, but the love that is based in the deep, direct, profound encounter of our inner penetration. That's where our love comes from, that my heart and your heart are not essentially separate. And then Manjushri asks, well, then what is the great compassion of the Bodhisattva? How do I enact that love? Right? How do I enact it? And Manjushri teaches him about something that is unbreakable because it's uncreated. Now, that's not actually the part I want to talk about. But I do want you to notice that it's Manjushri that's asking about compassion. This is really important to see. Right? The same thing in the Heart Sutra. Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva, while deeply practicing prajna paramita, the perfection of wisdom, clearly saw that all five aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. Avalokitesvara is the Bodhisattva of compassion. So compassion is coursing in prajna. Right? Karuna is coursing in prajna. And now here prajna comes to ask about compassion. These two are intimately linked. You can't develop one without the other. They are completely together. And so through this discussion between Manjushri and Vimalakirti, there is a goddess who is listening to this exchange, and she's so excited about how beautiful it is, and so she decides she's going to appear in a form that the assembly there can see her. And so she appears in this in a form of a goddess. She takes on a material form, and she rains down flowers upon the assembly, right? And this next exchange starts to unfold. It's really the same exchange that Manjushri was having with Vimalakirti, but now it gets grounded in the difficulty a little bit more. No? Manjushri Bodhisattva and Vimalakirti's discussion, very beautiful, but in a way stays kind of abstract. And the goddess loves it, but she's going to make it concrete, because that's what goddesses do, right? She's going to rain the flowers down, and these flowers, they attach to Shariputra and his band of the assembly, which are all these disciples of the Buddha. Right? And this very interesting dialogue between the two of them unfolds, in which she's discussing this relationship between emptiness and compassion with Shariputra. And Shariputra also oftentimes shows up as a kind of character where people are going to get corrected in their understanding of emptiness, right? So that's what happens in the Heart Sutra, right? Is a Shariputra is addressed, right? Shariputra, all dharmas are marked by emptiness. They neither arise nor cease. Shariputra is addressed. Shariputra is being educated. And that's because Shariputra is an example of the foremost wisdom, right? The foremost wisdom of the disciples of the Buddha. And yet so easily, even Shariputra can start to use those teachings of wisdom as a dismissal of the wholeness that appears as vibrant, luminous individuals. Even he can miss that point so easily. And so in their exchange, there's many interesting points, but this one that I read a couple weeks ago is the one that I'd like to focus on. So Shariputra and the goddess are discussing various things. And it gets towards the end of their conversation, and Shariputra says, "Goddess, what prevents you from transforming yourself out of your female state?" Now, it's important here that Shariputra regards that to become a Buddha, you should take on the body of a man. This was a common understanding. And so he says, well, why don't, you're a goddess, and you have this unbelievable understanding of emptiness. Why don't you simply transform your body into a man, so that you could, do the final work of becoming a Buddha? That's where that question's coming from. And the goddess says, although I have sought my female state for these 12 years, she's been in Vimalakirti's castle for 12 years. She says, although I have sought my female state for these 12 years, I have not found it. Reverend Shariputra, if a magician were to incarnate a woman by magic, would you ask her, what prevents you from transforming yourself out of your female state? Okay, so something that was a little more abstract when the Buddha said, oh, regard everything like the moon in the water, or like something that a magician conjured, right? And it sounds like you could say, well, okay, if that's what it is, we could just disregard it. Here she starts to turn it around, right? She says, I looked for that female state you talk about, but I don't see a thing. I don't see a tree. I don't see a woman. Would you say to a woman who was conjured by a magician, why don't you change your form? And Shariputra says, no, such a woman would not really exist. So what would there to be to transform? And the goddess says, just so, Reverend Shariputra, all things do not really exist. Now, would you think, what prevents one whose nature is that of a magical incarnation from transforming herself out of her female state? So she's just reiterating. She's saying, so yeah, if we're all like that moon in the water, why would we try to change something? If this form is not made, then why would we try to change it? And this is the part where the goddess employs her magical power, and she causes Shariputra to appear in her form, right? And then she appears in the form of Shariputra. So she switches the appearance. She sees in a different way. She makes him see in a different way. And so then the goddess transformed into Shariputra said to Shariputra, who's transformed into a goddess, Reverend Shariputra, what prevents you from transforming yourself out of your female state? And Shariputra, transformed into the goddess, replied, I no longer appear in the form of a male. My body has changed into the body of a woman. I do not know what to transform. And there's exclamation points on all those. He's sort of out of his mind, right? He's just like, what's going on? Right? So it's showing how stuck he is in the idea of male and female. But he's not stuck because he's not been able to disregard male and female. He's stuck because he doesn't know the truth and the beauty and the wholeness of male and female. And so he's so surprised to see things from another vantage point. And so the goddess continues, if the elder could again change out of the female state, then all women could also change out of their female states. All women appear in the form of women in just the same way as the elder appears in the form of a woman. While they are not women in reality, a tree is not a tree, they appear in the form of a woman. Therefore, the tree is a tree. Right? With this in mind, the Buddha said, in all things there is neither male nor female. Then the goddess released her magical power, and each returned to his ordinary form. She then said to him, Reverend Shariputra, what have you done with your female form? Shariputra says, I neither made it, nor did I change it. And the goddess says, just so, all things are neither made nor changed. And that they are not made and not changed, that is the teaching of the Buddha. Not changed, not made. They're unconstructed. They are not things fashioned. Right? The great luminosity of the tree is that it has not been created. It inter-is with you. It's not a thing. It's not an object of your subjectivity. Right? I was once, I loved to climb trees when I was, until I stopped at maybe 42 or something like that. When I was in high school, I loved to climb trees, and I was in the park one time climbing a tree with a young friend of mine. And someone came and yelled at me, and he said, don't you know trees aren't made for climbing? And I'm very proud of this moment. I was maybe 15. I looked back at him and I said, don't you know trees aren't made? And he got really kind of confused. And, he left us alone, and we were climbing the tree. It was nice. But this is the point, not made. Not made for? Like, what is the whole set of causes and conditions in your mind of the way that you view the world in which the making of male and female is so important? What is all the karma that runs through that? The goddess is presenting something different. Shariputra sees emptiness as an invitation to transcend the limits of femininity. He says he sees femininity as a limit, right? As a problem. And so he sees emptiness as a teaching that can help the goddess transcend that limitation. But the goddess says, what are you talking about? She expresses the not-madeness of femininity, the non-abiding of femininity, the wholeness of femininity. Why is that important? I mean, I hope it's slightly obvious why that's important. But it has to do with this teaching of emptiness, the sharpness of this teaching of wisdom. It's said to be like a sword. It's not about making things and destroying things. It's about seeing the world with those eyes in which each thing is the wholeness in that moment. Sometimes people use the term lived immediacy. The goddess was expressing the lived immediacy of herself. And in that case, herself includes the whole world that appears through her experience. The lived immediacy, not the idea. Right? As soon as emptiness becomes a thing, you use it as a tool or a weapon. But this sword of wisdom is not about being a tool or a weapon. It's about total meeting. So I think about this. If we talk about a tree is not a tree, therefore it is a tree. That one's not so hard for us. A man is not a man, therefore he's a man, or a woman is not a woman, therefore she's a woman, or many other gender expressions. We're using a binary here. Why is that so hard? Why is the freedom hard in that context? Well, because these are differences that we're really caught up in. We have a lot of karma caught up in how those differences are functioning in our lives. So we have to do something that's more nitty-gritty than kind of the awe of the beauty of the tree. You know? That doesn't mean that's not important. That can teach you about the heart posture of what it means to meet something through a lived immediacy. But we have to see that those power dynamics are real, they live in our life, and just because we find some measure of equanimity through meditation and other practice, we can't pretend like there's not something really difficult there. There is. And it has to do with power, it has to do with how we wield power. And so this gateway of the teachings of wisdom, these emptiness teachings, they can allow us then to explore what is the way in which I'm trying to rid myself of limitations by destroying particularity. That's the poison. But actually, the radical notion that my particularity and your particularity are what allow us transcendence. This is the Buddhist teaching. One other thing to note in this, and then I'll take questions, is a thing I love about the story is the playful shift of the goddess with Shariputra. It seems to me that it's always the accusation of the kind of the sun god to insist on regularity and things being in their proper place, right? Fixed, predictable, harnessable. And here, this goddess that appears like the moon in the water, she plays with that. And to me, this is a hint about how it is that we can point ourselves towards healing and towards the kind of empowerment that comes from recognizing our worth as the people that we are, recognizing the worth of the trees as the trees that they are, not because they are independent, graspable things, but just the opposite, because they are ungraspable, interdependent things that we can regard them with love and with compassion. Any questions or comments? We're trying something a little different with questions today. Jisha Kogen, if you're asking in the hall, he's going to point this mic at you, so don't be surprised. And if someone in the yard is asking a question, maybe if you could just come so I could see you, and he'll try the same thing. And if you're online, you can just ask the question straight away. And if we run into each other, we'll sort it out.
Last week you spoke about, you quoted Thich Nhat Hanh, the dialectics of wisdom.
Is that coming through, the question? You have to turn it towards yourself, looks like. Yeah, there we go.
So last week you spoke of the dialectics of wisdom and quoted Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yeah.
And this has a similar flavor to me, and the question is, could this be the dialectics of the relativity of emptiness?
Yeah. So that's the really the point, is that emptiness, if the teaching is taken as destroying the relativity, then we've lost it. Right? It's so easy for us to think that way, that the divine destroys the provisional, and this teaching is just the opposite. That the divine is, the face of the divine shows up in the provisional, or shows up as the provisional. So we always form an emptiness, we're always making sure to take care of both of them. Because the tree isn't a tree, that's the emptiness side, which means it's a tree, that's the form side. And those are always together. try. How's it go, Stefan, if he speaks like that?
It's pretty low.
It's pretty low. Why don't you just come up to the Engawa here, and then we'll try that. Thank you, everyone, for the patience. This is we're trying a new thing, but it's really important for the people online to be able to hear. So,
I had a question with regard to the practicality of little ways of reflecting on interbeing on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. And one thing I find that when I come here and I settle into this very comfortable space, and it's very easy to sort of be like, oh, this is wonderful, this is it, this makes sense. As soon as I go back to work and the pressures of daily life and whatnot, and it's very hard to keep that mindset, and you sort of like go back to sort of like a traditional American way of thinking of subject versus object and banging against each other, and it's like just hard to keep my mind state in that more healthier state. And any suggestions as to how one can practice that?
Yeah, so this is really core to the Prajnaparamita teachings. In the way that we usually study it here, we study the 6 perfections and the 5 perfections: generosity, ethics, patience or forbearance, vigor, and meditation, and then prajna. So do these 5 things. And it's so, like, it used to really annoy me, all the lists in Buddhism. The 6 is that, and the 12 is this, and the 4 this, and everything's like, oh God, why are these lists? But it's really helpful, because you say, okay, I know there's more than 5, right? I know there's a billion different practices, but I'm going to take those 5, and I'm going to really put myself into it. And as I put myself into it, this way in which we are not essentially separate, where the wholeness is showing up as an individual being, and the individual being is showing up as a wholeness, it becomes true through our action, through those practices of compassion or through karuna. So for example, when you're generous with someone, and you can just really straightforwardly practice generosity, and especially in the times where you're feeling that kind of like, I'm defending my department's budget because those people over there, or whatever, whatever's happening in that work environment. If you wait and you say, okay, what's the most generous thing to do? Which is not to roll over. Rolling over isn't generous. Rolling over is just giving up, right? But I have to ask myself the question is, what strengths do I have that I could offer to uplift the whole situation, right? And then as I enact it with the spirit that it's not me giving to this other person, but that the giving is the opening up of the wholeness, and our individuality is necessary for the wholeness to be opened up. Like if there's not a me and a you, no generosity can happen. So I need the particular, I need the differentiation. But now generosity brings about the sides of our wholeness, that each of us is individually whole, and then together we're whole. So that, to me, that's the magic of practice, really. And meditation in that is helpful because it helps to align our mind again and again in that way. But if we don't then also bring it to our ethical life, our life of generosity, vigor, patience, then it won't really live. It will just, it's a feeling we have. Yeah. And then it just remains a feeling rather than the basis of our conception. Yeah, that's good.
I have a question.
Hi.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Ready to. So I'm thinking, I guess it goes without saying that these teachings are incredibly profound and radical, and can be extremely difficult to accept, given that our mind wants to bounce back between one or another. Yeah. Either this or it's that. Yeah. So I remember when I was at Maitripa, one of the radical teachings at Tsongkhapa, who was roughly a contemporary of Dogen, was that that everybody was kind of leaning on the ultimate and becoming kind of nihilistic. Yeah. Nothing matters. It's no big deal. Right. And so he was trying to bring us back to the conventional. That's important too. Yeah. So I guess more of my question is going is the people that I work with at the hospital, especially in the inpatient side, are suffering tremendously. They're like birds in a cage. They've been in a cage for so long that when you open the door to let them free, all they know is to walk back in. Yeah. And so where, I guess my question is how do you ease people into this kind of thinking and kind of, give that little teeny bit of light that there actually is a way out? I mean, I know it's really complex with things that we call mental illness, but I feel like for some people there's a possibility, but they can't seem to go there.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah. So this is why compassion is radical, because your attendance to them in the deepest way is not an attending because you expect that they will get better.
Correct.
It's an attending to them because you know that they are not other than you.
Correct. Yes. Okay.
That medicine is a medicine that everyone needs. And it doesn't necessarily create some sort of effect that is measurable. Sometimes it does, but that, what I would say, is the deepest thread of these teachings, and something that is totally ungraspable. So when we start to try to talk about it, we get these weird formulations that are hard for us to try to hold. So I don't think we should think so much about how is it that we get people to think like this, is that we exhibit it through our own activity. The lived immediacy of our being there with another being, cultivating that love that Manjushri asked about, the great love. Cultivating it not as just a feeling, but as the uncovering of our shared lives. This is the root. And from there, then we can feel, oh, maybe this would be helpful for someone, or this will be helpful for someone, or maybe if I explained this, or maybe if I gave you an apple, it's not just that you would be fed, but that your heart would also know what it means to be nourished.
I think maybe just an example is that I have a patient I've visited many times who's very Christian and has asked me time and time again to print her pictures off the internet of Jesus for her to color.
Great.
And I've done that many times, and then her birthday was recently, and I just thought, oh, what the heck, I'll go online and buy her a Jesus coloring book. I can't tell you how deeply she appreciated that.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, there's a little opening there for her. Somebody cared enough to do that for her. So now I'm going to get all kinds of Christian things on Amazon, but anyway.
Great. Well, you have more opportunities. Yeah.
Anyway. Thank you.
I think Linda might be right there around the corner, kind of maybe waiting for a question.
Well, I am, but I might have answered my own question.
Okay.
But maybe you could just help.
Yeah.
Okay, so in your story about if you're a monk and you don't bow to women, you are not a monk. Who said that?
Dogen.
Okay. So there's a little. So is my equality as a woman dependent on a monk acknowledging it?
No.
So, but isn't there that kind of it seems there's another thing he should have said after that.
Oh, he said a lot of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
That wasn't just the end of the story.
No. What he was doing, what he does in that fascicle is talk about what is veneration. And he's chastising what would have been a very common attitude among the male monks at that time, that women monks were below them, and that a woman of spiritual accomplishment could just be dismissed. So in part of that discussion about veneration, he very forcefully just says, no, that not only are we equal in the Dharma, but that our community has to be one in which men and women are both valued for their life, and particularly in this case, he's talking about their position as monks and people of the way. So the part I was quoting is a chastisement that he's doing, and oftentimes the reason I brought it up was oftentimes people will use that as a kind of defense of our particular tradition. They'll say, well, Dogen said that we're all the same, and so let's not talk about it. Yeah.
Okay, So that would bring me to the next thing. Where are we today, several hundred years later, in terms of that teaching?
Yeah. I that teaching today, if I narrow it to modern day Zen, modern day North American Soto Zen, if I talk about that, I feel like we're in a much better place, but we have a lot of work still left to do. And what I mean by a lot better place is within our particular lineage in North America, there's a very equal distribution of male and female teachers. There's people in very prominent positions of leadership and respect. Many prominent women teachers who have both male and female students. So in that sense, I think there's a lot happened, particularly in the early seeds that were planted here. If we talk about work that needs to be done, there's still within the tradition, for example, there are so many records of the lives of men, and so when we talk about the Dharma, we're almost always referencing those records. There's a lot of work being done to uncover more about the stories of women in the Dharma, and so that's work to be done, but the work has to be done. I don't want to use the word work. I mean the actual liberation that comes from us unpacking that karma, that comes from encountering that karma, and the healing that comes when we start to shift the power dynamic that keeps us all, bound up. So that would be an example. A thing I brought up a few times, which is still a mystery to me. Not a total mystery. I continue to study it. Is not only at Buddha-ai, but across our lineages in North America, we have very few young women practitioners who are in our tradition, much less young women who are taking more leadership. And there's a lot of people studying that to try to understand, what is it? Is it just simple the weight of patriarchy that is just present in the institution, that the generation before was like, we're going to change this, and lots of women came into it and put their minds to changing it, but it's that weight is still there, and that the young women just feel like, I don't want to have to deal with that. I have other options, whereas I think a generation before, there weren't so many other options. There weren't so many teachers. If you want to study Buddhism, there was only a few places you could go. So that's one of the things people think about. To me, I think it's really, if we don't come to understand that more clearly and bring the appropriate medicine and healing, our lineages won't survive. Yeah.
So on a day-to-day, how are we in the assembly to act, to move it forward?
Right. So there are many levels of that. One of the levels is why I'm bringing this up in this teaching, is that we can't dismiss our differences, whether those are differences of gender or differences of race or differences of all socioeconomic differences, all different kinds of reasons. We can't dismiss them as being, the dismissal being the route to harmony. We have to value those differences. And so just on a general attitudinal level, as an assembly, that's what brings us together as an assembly, that kind of deep respect for each other and our differences. When it comes to more of the functioning of the institution, it means taking special care to help cultivate representatives of the Dharma who are of various kinds of differences. And that's, that's not, sometimes that sounds like you can just do it, right? But what you can do is the cultivation. And so you do the cultivation, and then you hope for the, not just hope, you're actively shifting something. But when the fruits of that shift are going to appear, we don't want to try to control the fruit, the way that those fruits blossom. We have to just put our mind into the cultivation. And so I think there's more we can do here in that realm, but I think we're also, that's alive. That process is alive. Yeah. Thank you. Hi.
Okay, so hopefully the question emerges from here. It's about getting into a karmic stream, and when you feel that that someone else is clamping down on you as an object, and so my karmic stream of when someone is clamping down on me as an object, I retreat. And so how to meet that situation in a different way? Because from your Dharma talk today, like we can see into the wholeness and of the situation, and we can see how it arises together. But when someone else is clamping down on you as an object, how can you meet the situation and not be objectified?
Yeah. So I think the core in this is we need to reorient our minds around boundaries. Boundaries are an expression of love. I'll say that again. Boundaries and conflict can be expressions of love. And we've been taught just the opposite. We've been taught that love is the place where you let go of all of the distinguishing things, right? I love you unconditionally. In fact, we think about love as being the unconditional. That's what makes it love, like really pure love. But what I'm saying here is that love may be unconditional, but the way you are with another person should not be unconditional. It takes form through causes and conditions. Because it takes form through causes and conditions, we are free, and through our freedom, the boundaries are so important. Right? So I don't know in any given situation always what's the best thing, but I would say if we're going to enact that love, the love, first of all, the wholeness that we're talking about, we need allies. We need other people that can see that my own objectification is a problem, that it shouldn't be okay, that there should be a boundary there. And then how that expression can come forward so that the boundary is clear and it's an expression of love. To me, this is really where the quick of a lot of I don't know if quick is the right word, that pivot point, the pivot of where so much of this karmic work happens. For example, I imagine that many people saw the video this week of the representative from New York, Alexandria. I never can say the middle part of her name. Ocasio-Cortez. Did people see that video of her responding to the representative who spoke to her? Boundary, love. Actually, I mean, when I listened to her, I heard love, and it wasn't like her like sort of showering him with like some sort of, well, we're all one, and so let's take care of each other kind of love. She was like, no, you don't get to shield yourself with your daughters and with your wife. To be decent, to be upright, to know what it means to be in this world together, you can't do that, right? So a lot of times it looks like that. Now I'm not saying here that any individual person who is objectified should be able to do that in any given situation. That's not my point at all. But if you listening to her words, that's example of boundary setting that I think is really is very important. And we need a community that cares about that. So sometimes we can say it, and that builds the community. And sometimes we have a community, therefore it can be said. But we have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to hold each other accountable to that wholeness in its difficult times as well. And I see, by the way, Reiko, I see you doing that. I mean, not right now because I can't see you, but. That's good. Well, we're about 15 minutes past, so we better close for today. And then next week, I think maybe next week we'll just devote the whole time to trying to sort this out a little bit. And I'll write something in the digest that points us to a larger conversation. We'll do that next week.